Rumors say that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, puppet master of ChatGPT and Elon Musk's nemesis, has scheduled a closed-door meeting with government officials in Washington for January 30th. The topic is the coming of AI PhD-level super agents. I don't know what this is either, but I have some speculations. The word AI agent has become used to refer to AI systems that, given a goal, can independently work out an action plan and draw on other tools to complete it. That is, you don't need to give them step-by-step instructions, you tell them what you want to do, and they'll occupy Russia for you. Google has already introduced Gemini 2.0 for the agentic era, which means that I can, for example, add calendar entries on your behalf, which, let's be honest, is not how we envisioned the AI revolution. Last week, OpenAI released Operator, a research preview of their first agent that can browse the web for you and then take actions like ordering ingredients for a pasta recipe.
Could you find a recipe of linguine with clams from our recipes website and add all ingredients to the grocery cart? I'm not doing anything from now on. The operator is just doing, and I'm just watching what it's doing. What is interesting with the operator is that it is using browsers that are built for the human, and it is seeing the exactly same screen that I'm seeing right now, and using the keyboard typing and mouse clicking to control the browser, just like human would do.
Still a far way to Russia. Operator is currently only available if you sign up for the $200 top tier, but one of those who tested it, Casey Newton, reports that at the moment using Operator is significantly slower, more frustrating, and more expensive than simply doing any of these tasks yourself. So I think I'll keep my $200. I'm not sure what a super agent is. To me it sounds like a type of bathroom cleaner, but possibly it means that it's not one agent, but more like one agent controlling an army of other agents that can communicate with each other. But what does it mean that a super agent is at PhD level, that it writes 90% of text as footnotes? Probably not. One thing it probably means is that these agents passed PhD level exams. These tests have been done for many large language models in different fields. Already 2 years ago, GPT was able to correctly answer about half of the undergraduate and graduate level questions in a physics exam correctly. I think it's reasonable to expect that today's models would score 80% and up. Just last week, though, researchers at the Center for AI Safety released a new AI test which they called Humanity's Last Exam. That includes questions from all scientific disciplines submitted by experts. At the moment, the best AIs score below 10%, though looking at the questions, I suspect that's better than most humans would do. But I doubt that passing tests is all there is to the PhD level tech. This is because there are indeed many aspects of PhD level research that can plausibly be done by AI agents more efficiently than by humans, most obviously literature searches. This could be good for many things, from fact-checking or summaries to identifying good research topics and funding opportunities. That alone, however, doesn't explain why OpenAI sees the need for a closed-door meeting with the government rather than making a public announcement. The secrecy suggests that their new agents have uses that the government might not want to see in the public domain. Maybe there are security concerns over potential military applications, especially when it comes to biological and chemical weapons or computer vulnerabilities. Or maybe they're considering using these agents to replace scientific advisors to the government. What could possibly go wrong? Now that you mention it, a lot of things could go wrong with PhD level AIs, because much of what's in the published scientific literature is nonsense, and much of what isn't nonsense is not in the scientific literature. Sociologists call this tacit knowledge. It's knowledge that for the time being only exists in people's brains. This is why I think that if you want to create PhD level AIs, you'll have to bring in human experts to train the AIs, otherwise the AI won't learn how to tell nonsense from no nonsense. That said, PhD super agents, if they ever see the light of the day, will make one hell of an impact in academia. This is exactly because a lot of what gets published in academia is nonsense already. The future of academic publishing is that papers will be written by AI agents, be reviewed by AI agents, and be read by AI agents, and in return for that, your taxes will go to someone with a PhD. It'll be great. So much about my misgivings about academia, but somewhat more seriously, AI agents could indeed be useful in research, especially for literature searchers. For the time being, I'm skeptical though about them doing independent scientific research, because often part of the problem is to figure out what a good goal is to begin with. But certainly it won't be long now until OpenAI releases its super duper agents that will be able to do this as well. So enjoy your last days in research before AI comes to take your job, and don't worry, once you recover from the shock, being a YouTuber isn't as bad as they say. I got a couple of questions about a string theory paper that appeared last month, which supposedly proves that string theory is inevitable, or physicists bootstrap the validity of string theory. I read this paper last year, but then I didn't talk about it because it's actually a good paper. And now I'm thinking I'm being unfair. If string theorists do something sensible for once, I should also mention it. So here we go. String theory is today known as a candidate for a theory of everything that would unify all the known physics in one single framework, particle physics combined with general relativity. If you believe string theorists, which you shouldn't, then it's actually the only such candidate, which it's not. But it's arguably true that among the attempts to develop a theory of everything, string theory is currently the best developed one by far. But string theory didn't start out as a theory of everything. This is the History Channel, but in this case the history is relevant context because the authors of the new paper revisited the historical argument for string theory. String theory was originally developed to describe the strong nuclear force that acts between the constituents of atomic nuclei. The reason is that the strong nuclear force has a rather peculiar behavior. It becomes stronger the larger the distance. If you think of the gravitational or electric force in contrast, these become weaker with distance. And where can you find a force that becomes stronger with distance? In a rubber band. The more you stretch it, the stronger the rubber pulls back. We know today that in the strong nuclear force, the analogy of the rubber is a flux tube of gluons, but they didn't know this in the 1960s. What happened instead was that Gabriele Veneziano tried to find a way to describe the data that physicists had collected at the time at SLAC, where they were slamming electrons into protons. He came up with an equation that's now called the Veneziano amplitude, that he, amazingly enough, just guessed by looking up suitable functions in a book. In any case, when physicists inspected his equation further, they realized that it described an interaction mediated by a closed string, so a loop, and that could be interpreted as a spin-tube particle, which is a graviton, the quantum of gravity. Yes, it seemed to describe quantum gravity. This got physicists very excited because they had previously tried to turn gravity into a quantum theory and that didn't work. They just got a lot of infinities. But this did not happen in Veneziano's approach. The original enthusiasm for string theory built on this. Here was a consistent way to obtain a quantum theory of gravity, something that no one had managed to do before. Indeed, string theorists often claim that the Veneziano amplitude is the only way to make gravitational interactions work without infinities. It's the only game in town, as they say. But so far, we only knew that string theory is one way to make it work. Missing has been a proof that it's the only way. This is where the new paper comes in. They write down a list of mathematical assumptions that the graviton amplitude needs to fulfill and then prove that the Veneziano amplitude is the only way to do it. This is where the headline comes from that says that string theory is inevitable. It's because their derivation proves that given certain assumptions, you need strings to quantize gravity, whether you want that or not. By the way, this video comes with a quiz that lets you check how much you remember. It's a nice paper. It's a careful mathematical argument that tells you what is logically possible. But let's put this into context. Physics isn't maths. Any mathematical proof is only as good as the assumptions that go into it, so one has to be careful with what this means. The most important assumption that goes into this argument is that whatever the theory of quantum gravity is, it needs to be complete, so it should not give rise to infinities, it should be UV finite, as physicists say. But as I explained in a recent episode, there's no reason why this needs to be the case. Whatever the next theory on the next deeper level is, it may still not be a final theory or a theory of everything. It might just be an incomplete theory again. Another questionable assumption that goes into the proof is that gravitons exist in the first place. This might simply not be true. Water waves are not made of water quanta, they're made of atoms. In just the same way, gravitational waves may not be made of gravitons. They could be made of something else entirely. Or maybe gravity just isn't a quantum theory, so trying to come up with an amplitude, which is a quantum thing, makes no sense. So I'd say this paper strengthens the argument for string theory, but saying that it makes string theory inevitable is an exaggeration. Think of it this way. In physics, assumptions are like first dates. Maybe you have a future together, but most often the future just brings an awkward goodbye. In the past 2 weeks, the global AI playground has completely changed, and some are saying that this is the long-awaited bursting of the AI bubble. I have a brief summary of all you need to know, and I want to explain why I don't think the bubble is bursting quite yet. On January 21st, Donald Trump announced the Stargate Project. Named after the 1994 movie Stargate, it's supposed to symbolize a wormhole into an ancient pyramid. I guess. It's not a governmental project, but an umbrella for private investors to pour money into AI. The investors currently include OpenAI, SoftBank, Oracle, and the Abu Dhabi-based investment fund MGX. The initial investment is $100 billion, and by 2029 it's supposed to reach $500 billion, at least that's the plan. Elon Musk promptly rained on Trump's parade and claimed that they don't actually have even the $100 billion. Just 2 days later, the Chinese firm DeepSeek released another open-source AI model called R1, a reasoning model similar to GPT-4o, and briefly afterwards, an image generation model called Janus Pro. Neither is the absolute best in its category, but among the best. This made it clear that China is not behind on AI, and if we factor in the possibility that they're not telling us the whole story, maybe China's actually ahead of the rest of the world. What really upset the Americans, though, is that the Chinese say they can do AI equally good, but at vastly lower cost and with less powerful chips. The numbers that have been circulating are that they did with $6 million what cost OpenAI more than $100 million and made do with 2,000 GPUs where OpenAI used 100,000. To add insult to injury, DeepSeek is built on Meta's open-sourced Llama and was most likely trained on GPT output, which absolutely no one could have seen coming. The DeepSeek people said they did it with a lot of small efficiency improvements that add up to a major difference. There's been some discussion about whether they're just faking numbers, and some have pointed out that the approximately $6 million was for the V3 training, not for the more powerful model, so it's an underestimate. But my impression from expert commentaries is that while we can quibble about the exact numbers, the efficiency gain and cost reduction production is broadly speaking plausible. In response, Nvidia stocks plunged 17%, wiping out more than $500 billion in value, and Gary Marcus declared that OpenAI may well become the WeWork of AI. WeWork, as a reminder, was an American company whose business model was to lease office space. That's not much of a business model, you might say, but investors put a lot of money into it nevertheless. They went bankrupt at the end of 2023. Gary Marcus has also repeatedly said that OpenAI gives him Theranos vibes. Yes, we have an AI bubble in the sense that many, if not most, of the existing AI companies are hugely overvalued, but I don't think the AI bubble is yet ready to burst. The most likely reason Nvidia stocks plunged is that the DeepSeek announcement further devalued the American AI companies which buy their chips from Nvidia. But if the AI training costs come down, this will open the market for many more players. I expect the stock market to recover because ultimately this is good news for technology development and the economy, not bad news. When will the bubble burst? It'll burst when it becomes clear that the current AIs, which are a specific type known as large language models, will never become profitable. As we discussed previously, some experts, including Jean Le Cur and Gary Marcus, doubt that large language models will ever get us to general intelligence, and I agree with them. But the market will only react to this once it becomes clear that the existing large language models can't be rescued with further updates. At that point, a lot of money will evaporate like this. But at the moment, the Stargate Project is just pumping more money into an existing bubble. Building power plants, extending the grid, and improving data infrastructure generally seems like a good idea, and all these are part of the Stargate Project. But to me, the Stargate Project is as crazy as if Americans had taken the first semiconductors and spent $500 billion in factories to produce them, rather than letting markets do their thing and wait for technological development to make microchips smaller and cheaper. That is, to wait for them to make economic sense. It's like the dot-com bubble, except instead of getting free t-shirts from pets.com, we get hallucinating chatbots and 17-hour debates about whether sentience can be monetized. That said, the arrival of DeepSeek drives home an important message. You can save a lot of money if you let Americans do the heavy lifting and then build on that knowledge. And that goes well with the European approach, which is basically to wait and see what goes wrong in America. I'm not usually a fan of European risk aversity. It reminds me of how my younger brother was waiting for me to touch the electric fence. But in this case, wait and see might indeed work out to our advantage. And if not, we'll always be here to give Americans lectures about responsibility, sustainability, and how our regulation-heavy bureaucracy prevents us from having fun. The bird flu pandemic in the United States is driving up egg prices. But on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, I worry much more that Americans are breeding the next human pandemic. A month ago, we saw a lot of scary headlines saying that we're just one mutation away from that. It turns out, though, that this wasn't quite right. Today I have a brief update on the bird flu pandemic in the United States and some thoughts on what we learned or didn't learn from COVID. The current bird flu or avian flu virus is a variant of the type H5N1. It jumped over to cattle and other mammals in the United States 1 year ago. It also infected at least 60 people in the US, one of whom died in December, a 65-year-old with pre-existing conditions who contracted the illness directly from birds. There's also been one reported human case in Canada. The cattle seem to not be all that bothered, but they've been spreading the virus across the country and to various wild, domestic and zoo animals. In December, a cheetah and a mountain lion were reported dead from the virus in a zoo in Phoenix. Foxes, bears, minks, cats, dogs, tigers and leopards also have all been found infected. Basically, the virus now covers the entire US mainland. According to the US Center for Disease Control, there has so far been no evidence for human-to-human transmission. But keep in mind that absence of evidence is not evidence of of absence. How dangerous is this virus? The reported cases in the US in humans have so far almost all been mild, except for the one person who died. But this virus has been around for about 20 years, and it's previously led to minor outbreaks of some hundreds of people, the biggest ones in Egypt and Indonesia. In these earlier outbreaks, the case fatality rate has been roughly 50%, and it was higher among young people. The case fatality rate is the fraction of people who died among the infections on record and might miss those who were infected but had little to no symptoms. But still, it's clearly a nasty virus, and that it's inching closer to humans isn't comforting at all. Now, last month, there was some commotion in the news about a study which allegedly found that the current strain of the virus is only one mutation away from becoming a new pandemic. This was somewhat of a misstatement of the paper, though. What the study actually found is that the virus is one mutation away from being able to attach to certain receptors in the human lung. But this isn't the only mutation that would be necessary to make the virus infectious among humans. It'd also have to be able to enter cells and to reproduce plentifully in them, which would require further mutations. But the virus will keep on mutating, and it's just a matter of time until human-to-human transmission begins. If not with this virus, then with another one. And then what? Human vaccines against the virus exist, but they need to be adapted to the current strain. Already in July last year, the Biden administration handed out $176 million to Moderna, and just before the Trump inauguration, they followed up with another $590 million. That's a lot of money for something you hope not to use. And it's not just in the US. Pharma companies globally are preparing to roll out vaccines quickly, and countries have begun to put in orders. In June, the EU signed up for small orders called pre-pandemic that are meant for those most at risk of being infected. In December, the UK ordered 5 million for a similar purpose. Norway has ordered 2 doses for everyone. Still, producing those and rolling them out will take as much as 6 months after the onset of the pandemic, which means we'll have to think about lockdowns again. So what, if anything, have we learned from COVID? Well, one thing I learned is that despite all the decades of talking about pandemic preparedness, no one had any sensible lockdown plans. It took seemingly forever to come up with local indicators and to find out what actually worked and what not. Instrumental for this were in the end cheap and fast tests. I'm afraid that the world is missing the boat again. We'll need rapid tests in the supermarkets long before we need vaccines. The other thing that I hope we learned from COVID is that what sounds plausible doesn't always make sense, and if a situation evolves fast, one needs to react fast. After the first lockdown, it was apparent that scientists had underestimated the enormous psychological toll, but then were unable or unwilling to roll back on measures that evidently were not working, like travel bans. The brief summary is, it's not a pandemic yet, but it's working on its resume. A new startup in Canada wants to build the first conscious artificial intelligence on a quantum computer by using Roger Penrose's ideas about consciousness. The startup is located in Vancouver, Canada, and called Nirvanic. It was founded by Suzanne Gildart, who previously worked on robotics and sold off a company for several $100 million. Neat. But hey, I recently succeeded in burning a paper on camera without setting off the smoke alarm. Let no one say I'm not technologically competent. But back to the startup. Gildart has a PhD in quantum something from the University of Birmingham and also worked with D-Wave. I'm telling you this so you know this isn't a quack enterprise, at least not obviously so. The website says that along with top people at Google, we believe consciousness research is the next big quantum use case. This prompted Quantum Insider to claim that consciousness research is the next quantum use case. Such a lot of nonsense. Okay, let's sort this out. First, I have a pretty good idea who those top people at Google are. Here is Hartmut Neven, Vice President of Engineering at Google.
Quantum information science may enable us to answer one of humanity's deepest questions. what creates conscious experience. An attractive conjecture is that consciousness is how we experience the emergence of a single classical world out of the many the multiverse is composed of. With academic collaborators, I've started a program to experimentally test this conjecture using methods of quantum neurobiology. If our conjecture is correct, this would allow us to expand human consciousness in space, time, and complexity.
Yes, that's the same guy who wrote the blog post about Google's Willow chip, which created the myth that Google had found evidence for parallel universes that then made global headlines. Nevin is also one of the authors of the now infamous Wormhole on a Quantum Computer paper, so I'm definitely getting some strange vibes here. But back to this new startup. The website explains that our thinking is inspired by Penrose Hameroff's ARC-OR theory. Nevanich believes our consciousness experience aligns well with key properties of quantum mechanics, entanglement, superposition, and measurement. Our approach is to use these properties with quantum computers to create conscious agentic AI systems that are aligned with human values. But, well, that doesn't make any sense. Penrose has argued that consciousness is not computable. His reasoning is, in a nutshell, that humans can understand Gödel's theorem, which an algorithm can't, because that would contradict Gödel's theorem. Hence, human brains do something that isn't computable. I don't buy this argument because it's possible to prove Gödel's theorem with symbolic reasoning, and that doesn't contradict Gödel's theorem. I don't just believe this is possible, I know it's possible because a computer algorithm has in fact proved Gödel's theorem with symbolic reasoning. But then I myself have forgotten how the proof works, so if Penrose is right, then maybe I'm now unconscious. Be that as it may, Penrose thinks that consciousness isn't computable, so I find it rather ironic that this woman says she can build a conscious computer based on Penrose's ideas. Then again, if you look at the way that Penrose's ideas have been mathematically realized by him or other people, they're computable. Together with Stuart Hameroff, he's, for example, developed the idea that consciousness is created in the brain in big molecules called microtubules. These microtubules, so the idea, can create coherent superpositions, and these superpositions then collapse, which creates consciousness. This idea has a few problems. Microtubules aren't just present in the brain, they aren't specific to humans. It's controversial that they have any significant quantum effects, and even if they have, it's unclear what that should have to do with consciousness. But even if we leave all this aside, it doesn't take a quantum computer to compute what these microtubules do. We know this because the best support for Penrose's idea comes from a computer simulation of microtubules, the result of which supports the idea that they can survive in coherent superpositions for some time. That said, it makes sense that you don't need a quantum computer for that because there isn't a lot of entanglement going on. Okay, that was a lot of words. If you've already forgotten half of what I said, this video comes with a quiz that'll help you remember what we talked about. But the brief summary is that if you buy the Penrose and Hameroff idea, then either you can't compute consciousness or you can compute it on a classical computer. So how is that a use case for quantum computing? There are a lot of other red flags on the website. For example, it states that first-person experience and free will are properties of consciousness that we can't explain with classical physics, and that superposition creates a feeling of choice. Both of these statements are highly questionable and at the very least empirically unsupported. There are a lot of theories about consciousness. A recent review paper listed a whopping 200 of them, and most of them have nothing to do with quantum things. The brief summary is that for the time being, you have better chances to find consciousness in your fridge than in a quantum computer. Did you know that carrots have microtubules? Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.